Are you going for gold, silver, or bronze with your data architecture? Well, that's kind of what we're exploring this week in the Data Radio Show. Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Data Radio Show. I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into medallion architecture because it keeps popping up in a number of conversations that I've been having around this industry. And it's kind of a fascinating way of looking at things. You know, the architecture features bronze, silver, and gold layers representing raw, cleansed and curated data. So exactly how does that work? How do you define what these are, and how does that pay off for people looking at using this architecture? So I fed a whole bunch of information into Notebook LM and decided to do a little bit of a deep dive listening to them and see what they come up with on the topic. Now don't forget, before you have a sit down and listen to this one, to like or share or subscribe to the channel to get updates as we go along. In the meantime, let's learn a little bit more about Databricks Medallion Architecture.
All right, let's jump right in and take a deep dive into this medallion architecture thing. You know, the framework everyone's buzzing about for organizing data, all that data within a data lakehouse. We've got a bunch of articles, even a YouTube video, I think, breaking it down. And, well, I guess our mission today is to figure out how this system really works.
I'm with you. Let's get past the buzzwords.
Exactly. So before we even get to the architecture itself, let's talk about data lakehouses. I think I get the concept, but maybe you can give us that, insider perspective.
Think of a data lakehouse as like this one-stop shop for all your data needs. It combines that huge storage of data lake, with the structure, the analytics power of a data warehouse. It's really becoming a go-to for organizations dealing with like massive data sets, different kinds of data.
Yeah, and some of these articles mention tools like Databricks, Delta Lake, and Apache Spark. Are those like essential parts of a data lakehouse?
Not the only tools out there, but definitely popular ones. Databricks Delta Lake, that's like it acts like a super organized storage layer, brings some reliability to data lakes. And Apache Spark, well, that's a powerhouse for processing those huge data sets we talked about. They often go hand in hand with these data lakehouse architectures.
Okay, so we have this powerful data lakehouse, but one article actually called a poorly managed one a data swamp. I can see how that could happen, right? Just dumping everything in there with no plan.
And that's where this medallion architecture comes in. It's like this set of guidelines, for taming that potential data chaos. It's pretty simple, actually, just 3 layers: bronze, silver, and gold. Each one represents a stage in how the data gets refined.
Simple. It sounds kind of fancy, all that bronze, silver, and gold.
The beauty is in that simplicity, I think. Raw data comes into that bronze layer, right? Then gets cleaned, standardized in silver, and finally ends up as refined, business-ready data in that gold layer.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Walk me through that bronze layer. What exactly happens to the data there, that first stage?
Think of bronze as the raw materials stage. It's where all that unprocessed data goes, straight from the source. Kind of like ore fresh from the mine, just waiting to be refined.
So basically a data dumping ground.
Not exactly. It's more like a carefully organized storage area. Even in that raw form, we add metadata, things like timestamps, source identifiers, so we know when it arrived, where it came from, vital for things like compliance and auditing.
Makes sense, but why bother keeping all that raw data anyway? Doesn't it just take up space?
It's a great question, actually. There are a couple of important reasons. First, regulations often require keeping that original data. It's like a digital paper trail. Second, keeping it gives you options later. What if business needs change? You might discover something valuable in that raw data that you didn't see before. If it's gone, well, you're out of luck.
So bronze is about preserving the data, laying the groundwork for future analysis.
Got it. Now, on to the silver layer. Is that where the real refinement happens? Absolutely. Silver is where we clean, deduplicate, transform the data into a usable format, like prepping your ingredients before you cook. We want a unified view of the data before we move on to more complex analysis.
So we're talking about basic cleaning, formatting.
Yeah, but it's a little more nuanced. One article mentioned doing just enough transformation at this stage, avoiding those heavy aggregations or complex business rules.
Just enough. That seems, I don't know, a bit subjective. How do you know where to draw that line?
Great point. And you've hit on one of those hot debates in data engineering. How much transformation belongs in silver? Some folks say minimalist, others want to do more upfront.
No one-size-fits-all answer then, right? Depends on the situation, how they use the data.
Exactly. That's what makes this layer so interesting.
Okay, seeing the layers unfold here. Silver's clean, consistent data, and then gold, that's where it shines.
That's where it all comes together. Gold has that highly refined data ready for business intelligence, dashboards, those reports. Here we bring in the complex business rules, those aggregations we skipped in Silver.
So silver's the foundation, gold's the insights.
Exactly. And this data might be structured in different ways, like a Kimball-style star schema, which is commonly used for reporting, or maybe data marts. Those are subsets of data targeted for specific departments or functions.
Okay, layers are making sense. Now, sources also mention that Medallion architecture prefers ELT extract, load, transform over the traditional ETL. Why is that?
It's fascinating, actually. Medallion architecture is all about loading raw data first, transforming it later. That aligns perfectly with ELT, where the priority is getting data in quickly, right? It's about flexibility, supporting that incremental refinement process that's inherent to this whole architecture.
Get the data in, figure out what to do with it later. Sounds agile, but I imagine there are downsides too, right?
Of course, trade-offs to consider, always.
Let's dive into those. What are the big pros and cons of adopting this whole Medallion architecture?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is simplicity, right? Bronze, silver, gold. It's easy to grasp, even for folks who aren't data engineers. Makes it easier to implement, manage, compared to other systems.
Simplicity is always a win, especially when we're talking about something as complex as, well, data.
And that structure, it leads to better data quality, too. Refining the data step by step, you have more control over each stage. Fewer errors, more reliable data.
Garbage in, garbage out. Better organization, better quality. What other benefits are there?
Flexibility and scalability are huge. The layers mean you can adapt to changing needs. Need a new data source or to change how you process things? No problem. And you can scale each layer independently, giving you the power to, like, beef up storage or processing power for specific layers as needed.
Okay, I'm seeing the appeal, but downsides, no system's perfect.
True. Storage costs can be a drawback. Remember, you're essentially storing 3 copies of your data: raw, cleansed, and aggregated. That can triple your storage needs, which gets expensive, especially with those huge data sets we talked about.
Right, even if storage is cheap, tripling your needs, that adds up.
Another challenge is, well, the expertise needed. The basic concepts are fairly straightforward, but doing it effectively requires specialized knowledge. You need people who understand data engineering. The tools can be tough for smaller teams or those new to it.
So not just plug and play, takes planning, expertise, ongoing management.
Exactly. An investment, but one that can pay off big time when done right.
This has been helpful in setting the stage for understanding Medallion architecture. Basics, nuances, even those A-side properties. Now, one thing that struck me in the articles, it seems like they implied that Medallion architecture requires a data lakehouse architecture. What if an organization isn't using a data lakehouse? Can they still benefit from the principles of Medallion architecture?
That's a great question, and it shows how adaptable these concepts are. While it's usually linked with data lakehouses, those core principles can be used elsewhere too. You can adapt that bronze, silver, gold framework to work with a traditional data warehouse or even a hybrid environment. It's about understanding that incremental refinement and making it work for you.
It's not all or nothing. You can borrow the ideas. That's good to know. Let's circle back to that silver layer debate. It really piqued my curiosity. How much transformation is too much there? Where's the line?
Yes, the silver layer debate. It's where the art and science of data engineering meet.
Yeah.
Remember, silver is about creating a unified, clean foundation for further processing.
So cleaning, standardizing, maybe some basic transformations to make the data consistent across sources.
Exactly. But the question is, where do we stop? Do we do calculations or aggregations there? Do we start joining tables at that stage?
And that's the debate, right? Keep it simple versus doing more upfront.
Exactly. Keep it simple. Folks say too much in silver makes it hard to manage. They say save the heavy lifting for gold, where you're tailoring data for specific uses.
Don't overload silver with stuff that might not be needed for every analysis.
Right. But sometimes doing more upfront is actually more efficient. Like if you have data sources with different units of measurement, it might make sense to standardize those in silver. Then everyone's working with the same data from the start.
Or if you need to join data from different sources, do it in silver, save you from repeating that later.
Exactly. So the right level of transformation really depends on your data, your use cases, your preferences, really.
It's that balance between simple and efficient. That's where the expertise of a good data engineering team comes in.
Absolutely. They need to weigh those trade-offs, make those decisions based on their understanding of the data and the organization's needs.
I love how seemingly simple concepts lead to such rich and complex considerations.
That's what makes data engineering so engaging. Always more to learn, more to optimize.
Okay, one more question about silver. I read in one article that it's a bit of a gray area in terms of implementation. It mentioned potentially even having sublayers within Silver. Is that common? What are your thoughts?
That's a great observation, and it shows how customizable this architecture can be. Sublayers within Silver definitely make sense in some situations. For instance, you might have a Silverlight layer for basic stuff and a Silver Heavy layer for more complex transformations, those needed for specific cases.
Like a tiered system within Silver. What are the trade-offs there? When would you choose to do that?
Well, the trade-off is complexity, right? More sublayers mean more management, potentially a steeper learning curve for your team.
Yeah.
But if you have a lot of data sources, a lot of different use cases, those sublayers can give you more control, lead to better data quality and efficiency in the long run.
So it's about that balance again. Increase control and flexibility versus complexity. No easy answer. It depends.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting about this. No one-size-fits-all. It's about understanding the principles and applying them in a way that works for your organization.
Learning so much from this deep dive. We've covered the basics, delved into the nuances, and even those ACD properties. Now I'm ready to see how it all works in the real world.
Let's dive into those real-world examples in part 2.
Okay, welcome back to our deep dive. In part 1, we got into the nuts and bolts of medallion architecture. Those 3 layers, bronze, silver, gold, even had that debate about just how much transformation is right for that silver layer. Makes me wonder, is there even more to uncover there?
Oh, there's always more to explore, especially with the silver layer. That's what makes this architecture so flexible, right? It's not like a rigid set of rules, more like a framework you can adapt.
That's what I find so interesting. It's like not just a tech solution, but a whole philosophy of data management, you know? But I'm really curious to see it in action. Any examples of organizations using medallion architecture and doing it well?
Well, one industry that comes to mind is healthcare. Healthcare providers, they deal with mountains of data, patient records, lab results, insurance claims, the whole 9 yards. It's complex and, well, very sensitive data.
Definitely sounds like a scenario where a data lakehouse and the structure of medallion architecture would be a good fit.
Right. And that's what we're seeing. Healthcare organizations are using this to, bring order to the chaos, find those insights, and ultimately improve patient care.
Love that, improving patient care. Can you give us a concrete example of how that might work in practice?
Sure. Let's say a hospital wants to predict which patients are high risk for a certain condition,
Mm-hmm.
right? They could use medallion architecture to bring all that data from different systems into the bronze layer, the raw data zone. Then in silver, they'd clean and standardize the data. Maybe create a unified patient identifier, map all those different medical codes to one standard system. It's all about consistency.
So silver is like prepping the data, getting it ready for analysis, almost like, you have to chop the veggies and measure everything before you start cooking.
Perfect analogy. Once that data is prepped in silver, they move on to gold. That's where they might build a predictive model. They aggregate patient data by age, medical history, genetic markers, all those factors. And that refined data powers the model.
That's pretty amazing. It shows how this can be used for basic data management, but also for like advanced analytics, machine learning, all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the results can be significant. The hospital could identify those high-risk patients sooner, which means more effective preventative care, hopefully better outcomes.
That's a great example. It really highlights the potential here. Any other examples, maybe from different industries? Just curious how versatile this architecture can be.
Another area is financial services. Banks, financial institutions, they have tons of data too. Transactions, customer data, market data, risk assessments, you name it. And it's all very sensitive, needs to be handled carefully.
I bet security is a huge concern in that world.
Huge. And that's one reason why this approach is so appealing in finance. It provides a really solid framework for data governance and security, making sure that sensitive information is protected at every stage.
Can you give us a specific use case, something in the world of finance? I'm trying to picture how it would work there.
Okay, imagine a bank wants to build a real-time fraud detection system.
Right.
They could use medallion architecture to take all that transaction data, feed it into the bronze layer. Then in silver, clean it up, standardize it. They could remove duplicates, flag anything suspicious based on certain rules, just making sure it's prepped for that deeper analysis.
So silver is like the first line of defense, right? Catching those red flags.
Exactly. Then, in gold, they build a machine learning model that analyzes patterns, finds those anomalies that might signal fraud. This model gets integrated into their system to automatically flag or block those suspicious activities.
Wow, it's like having a digital detective working behind the scenes. And it all comes back to that bronze, silver, gold structure.
It's all about having a well-defined architecture. It's the foundation for these complex systems, ensuring data quality, consistency, security. Can't compromise on those, especially in finance.
These examples are really helpful. I'm starting to see how it works in different situations. But let's not forget those challenges we talked about in part one, storage costs, the need for expertise, all that. Have you seen organizations struggle with these in real-world implementations?
It's important to be realistic, right? Medallion architecture, it's not a silver bullet. There are challenges. One pitfall is thinking it's just about creating those three layers, you know, bronze, silver, gold. But there's more to it.
It's not just putting data into different buckets.
Exactly. It's about those principles we talked about, the incremental refinement, choosing the right tools, having the expertise to make it work. Without those, you could end up with a data swamp, even with the best intentions.
So it's more of a journey, not a destination. You need a dedicated team to keep things running smoothly.
Right. And that brings up another challenge, data governance. Medallion architecture provides a framework, but you still need to define clear ownership, establish those data quality standards, implement security protocols for each layer.
Data governance, it's a hot topic these days, and for good reason, right? Especially as organizations deal with more and more data.
Couldn't agree more. And it has to be baked into your medallion architecture design from the beginning. Can't be an afterthought.
It's about a holistic approach, not just the tech, but the people, the processes, and that overall governance framework, right?
Exactly. And often this requires a change in how organizations think. It's not just IT anymore. It's about creating a culture where everyone understands the importance of data quality, security, governance.
That's a big shift for a lot of organizations. It's not just adopting a new tech, it's changing how people think about data.
It's a journey, not a sprint. And organizations need to be ready to make that investment if they want to unlock the full potential of medallion architecture.
That's a great point. We've seen success stories, but it's important to be realistic about the commitment involved. It's a strategic approach, needs planning, and, well, follow through.
Well said. It's about understanding the potential and the pitfalls, making smart choices based on your needs, your resources.
Now, I'm curious about the impact on the data teams themselves. How does using this architecture change their work, their roles?
The human element is often forgotten, but it's crucial. Implementing this can definitely change workflows, collaboration patterns. It impacts people.
I'm picturing more communication, more collaboration between different roles.
Definitely. Communication becomes even more important. Data engineers working on bronze and silver, they need to talk to the analysts, the business users, understand their needs. Everyone needs to be on the same page.
So it breaks down those silos that can happen between different data roles?
Exactly. It's more iterative, more agile. Data engineers get the data in quickly, knowing that further refinement happens later. Everyone has their role to play.
That could lead to faster insights, which is always good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it empowers the analysts, the business users. They can access and analyze data without needing the engineering team for every little thing.
It's about empowering everyone to work with data effectively. A more data-driven culture.
That's the goal. But building that culture takes time. You need training, documentation, good communication. Everyone needs to understand the system.
And that strong data governance we talked about, right?
Can't forget that. Without clear guidelines or processes, things can easily slip through the cracks.
So it's a lot more than just the tech. It's about the people, the processes, the culture.
It's a holistic approach, for sure.
Okay, before we move on to implementation, anything else our listeners should know? Anything else from those sources that stood out to you?
One thing that got me thinking was the discussion of data mesh and, well, how it relates to medallion architecture.
I remember that. I found that connection really interesting. Can you talk more about that relationship?
Data mesh is a newer idea, emphasizes decentralization, data ownership. The idea is to break down those data silos by giving ownership to different domains, different business units.
So instead of a central data team, you have different teams responsible for their own data. It's almost like a mini medallion architecture within each domain.
That's a great way to think about it. And you might think they clash, but data mesh and medallion architecture can actually work really well together.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How do you see them fitting together?
Well, medallion architecture gives you the framework for managing, refining data within each of those domains. So you could have a data mesh, and each domain uses medallion architecture to handle their own data. But they still follow the overall data governance, the interoperability standards set by the organization.
So you combine the decentralized ownership of data mesh with the structure, the refinement of medallion architecture.
Exactly. It's the best of both worlds. Empower teams, but keep the data quality, consistency, and security across the board.
That's powerful. It shows how these concepts aren't mutually exclusive. You can blend them to create a system that works for you.
Absolutely. And as the data world keeps changing, we'll see more and more innovative approaches like this.
It's an exciting time to be working with data.
No doubt. So much potential out there.
We've covered a lot today. Real-world examples, challenges, data teams, even data mesh. Think we're ready to wrap up this part and move on to implementation.
Sounds good. We've covered the concepts, the key considerations. Now it's time to put it all into practice.
For our listeners who are ready to get their hands dirty, join us for part 3, where we'll talk about the nuts and bolts of actually building this thing. Okay, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive, parts 1 and 2. We talked about the what, the why, even the who of Medallion architecture. But now, let's get to the how. How do we actually build this thing?
It's time to get practical, right? Let's dive into those implementation details. For those who are ready to roll up their sleeves and, actually start building this thing, we'll break down those key things to think about, different ways to do it, and I'll even share some tips and tricks, from my own experience.
Okay, for someone who's ready to start building, where do we begin? What are those first steps on this journey? What do we do first?
Well, before you get into the tools and all that, you have to take a step back. Think about your goals. What are you trying to achieve with this medallion architecture? What data are you working with? What are you going to use it for, analytically?
So it's starting any project. You need to know what you're trying to do.
Exactly. Those objectives are going to guide you in every decision, from what tech to use to how you model your data. It's your roadmap.
Okay, goals are the foundation. And then what? Do we go shopping for tools?
Absolutely. And luckily, there are so many tools and technologies out there, open source, cloud-based. There's something for everyone, every budget.
All right, give us the rundown. What are those popular choices for each layer of the architecture?
Okay, let's start at the beginning. The bronze layer. That's all about ingesting data, storing it, and it's usually raw data, lots of it, all different formats. Cloud storage services, things like Amazon S3 or Azure Blob Storage, they're very popular for this.
So that's for just getting the data in, but what about managing all that data, processing it, especially when it's coming in fast?
That's where streaming platforms come in. Things like Apache Kafka or Amazon Kinesis. They can handle those high-volume data streams, perfect for real-time ingestion.
Real-time ingestion. That sounds intense. When would you need something that fast?
Think of fraud detection. You have to analyze transactions as they're happening, or maybe social media. You need to see those trends as they emerge.
Okay, I get it. Sometimes speed is key. So we have data flowing into bronze. What about silver, where the data gets cleaned and transformed? What tools are used there?
That's where tools like Apache Spark and Databricks are really powerful. They're made for those huge data sets and complex transformations.
Databricks, we hear that name a lot with data lakehouses. What makes it so, special?
Databricks is like a one-stop shop for a lot of organizations. It brings data engineering, data science, machine learning all together in one platform.
So you can do everything from, ingesting data to building machine learning models all in the same place. Are there other options for Silver, though?
Definitely. The cloud providers like AWS and Azure, they have their own tools. AWS has Glue, Athena, things like that. Azure has Data Factory, Synapse Analytics, lots of choices. It depends what you're already using and what your team prefers.
So many options. It's pretty amazing. Okay, finally, the gold layer. That's where the data is, ready to use. What tools are popular there?
In gold, you often see those traditional data warehousing tools, relational databases, things like SQL Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, the classics.
Yeah, the old faithful databases. But are there cloud-based options too? I bet there are.
Of course. Cloud data warehouses like Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery, they offer a lot. Scalability, performance, and they can be more cost-effective.
It's amazing how the tech has evolved for all this. But with so many options, it can be overwhelming. Any advice for someone who's, just starting out with this whole medallion architecture thing?
My advice: don't feel like you have to use every new tool that comes along. It's all about choosing tools that fit your needs, your infrastructure, what your team knows.
That's good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but you have to focus on what works for you. Now, what about the implementation itself? Is there a standard way to do it? Or does it depend on the tools you choose?
There's no one right way to do it. It depends on the tools, the data sources, your overall data strategy. But there are some general principles, best practices that can help.
Okay, what are some of those principles, things our listeners should keep in mind as they're, building this thing?
One of the most important is to be iterative, agile. Don't try to build the perfect system all at once. Start small, get it working, then add more as you go. as you learn.
So it's like building a house, right? You start with the foundation, then the walls, then the roof, one step at a time.
Exactly. And just like building a house, you need a blueprint. With medallion architecture, that means defining your data model, your transformation logic, your data governance policies. All those things need to be thought through up front.
So before you lay the first brick, you need a vision, right? You have to know what you're building and how it's all going to work.
Exactly. And that's where data modeling comes in.
Yeah.
You have to really think about how you're going to structure that data in each layer. That's going to impact data quality, how fast your queries run, the whole efficiency of the system.
So it's not just throwing data in different places. There's a strategy to it.
Absolutely. And that's where having a good data engineering team is so important. They need to understand data modeling, different data structures, how to make things perform well, how to make it scale.
Okay, data modeling is key. What other best practices should we keep in mind?
Automate. As much as you can.
Okay.
Automate the data ingestion, the transformation, even your data quality checks.
Automation is always good, but why is it so important here?
Well, for one, it reduces errors. Computers don't make those silly mistakes humans do. It also improves consistency and, frees up your team to do those more strategic tasks. Plus, your data pipelines become so much easier to manage.
All right, automation is a must. What else?
Don't forget about data quality. This architecture can help you improve it, but it's not magic. You still need those checks and balances throughout the process.
Even with a fancy architecture, you can't just put garbage in and expect something good to come out.
Exactly. And remember, data quality isn't just about accuracy. It's about being complete, consistent, timely, relevant. Is your data good enough for what you need it for? That's the question you need to ask.
It's about being reliable.
Exactly. And that takes a combination of things: automated checks, manual reviews, monitoring how things are going.
Iterative development, data modeling, automation, data quality. What else? What other advice do you have? Anything else we should know?
One more thing, and it's super important. Document everything. I mean everything. Data model, transformations, data governance policies, those automation scripts we talked about, everything.
It's like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs so you don't get lost.
Exactly. Good documentation makes it so much easier to understand the system, maintain it, troubleshoot when things go wrong. It's also crucial for when new people join the team, so they can get up to speed quickly.
Documentation is often forgotten, but it sounds like it's really key here.
It is. And keep it up to date. As your system changes, update those docs.
Solid advice. We've covered so much in this deep dive: the basics, the examples, the challenges, and now how to implement it. I think our listeners are ready to go build their own medallion architectures, or at least start thinking about it.
I hope so. Just remember, this field is constantly changing. Stay curious, keep learning, and don't be afraid to adapt as things change. Data is a fascinating world, always something new to learn.
That's a great way to put it. Well, we've reached the end of our medallion architecture deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed it and that you've learned something, something that will help you on your own data journey.
It's been fun.
Until next time, happy data wrangling, everyone.
Hey, thanks again for checking out this week's video on the Data Radio Show. Now, don't forget to hit that like button or share the video or subscribe to the channel. And if you want to know more about some of the stuff that we do, there's links down in the description to our newsletter that we put out each week, as well as our school classroom where you can learn a whole bunch of stuff directly from experts. And we're putting on a bit of an event in Australia. You can learn a little bit more about that as well at the school classroom. All right, until next time, look after yourself. Live long, prosper, be one with the force, and I will catch you guys all next time.